The day I found out Kevin, the head of our crime syndicate, had cheated for the first time, I filed for divorce. But he locked me in our bedroom for 5 days and 4 nights, going through 2 boxes of condoms. Afterward, he wore a look of utter helplessness as he explained. Our rival set me up, drugged me, and forced me into a one-night stand with Serena. You have to forgive me, added. The second time I saw him with Serena at her prenatal appointment. Again, I brought up divorce. He pushed me against the wall, his voice laced with menace. Audrey, you want a divorce over my dead body? You need to trust me. Serena is a plant from our enemies. I have to keep her close. It's a deep cover operation. Once she has the baby, I'll get rid of her immediately. But then Serena had a miscarriage, and everyone suspected I was behind it. Serena lunged at me, her hands clamped around my throat like a madwoman. Hate me all you want. Why would you hurt my baby? Even Kevin looked at me, his eyes filled with disappointment. I told you to wait. Why would you touch my child? And again. With that, he ordered me to be locked in the basement. You'll stay down here until you've truly reflected on what you've done. Curled in the corner, I sent a message on my phone. Erase all records of my child's birth. Once the paperwork is complete, arrange for me and my child to leave. The blood-soaked basement door finally opened just as I was losing consciousness. Kevin scooped me up, pulling me into a tender embrace, his voice filled with concern. You almost ruined our syndicate's counter scheme. I had to punish you like this to give the crew a proper explanation. You know I love you the most. Once my plan involving Serena succeeds, we can go back to how things were, and his plan involving Serena meant getting her pregnant with his child again. He claimed it was the only way to keep Serena controlled and our enemies in the dark. I watched him put on his act of deep affection. My heart a barren wasteland, but Kevin, we could never go back to how things were. There would be no future for us. And he would never know that he already had a child with me the day he became the syndicate boss. He witnessed a subordinate's child being held hostage by their rivals. The subordinate's wife, in a surge of maternal instinct, died tragically in a hail of gunfire protecting her child. From that day on, he would often tell me, haunted by the memory, let's not have children. I don't want a child to become your weakness. And I can't bear the thought of losing you. I agreed. But as I saw his eyes light up with joy, time and again looking at other people's children, I really wanted to give him a surprise that year. Kevin went to Mexico for a mission and told me to stay away for a year. It was during that time I found out I was pregnant with his child. Afraid he'd worry, I kept it from him until the baby was born later. Because of a premature birth, the baby was weak and had to stay in the hospital. And that's when Kevin brought Serena into my life. My surprise never made it to him. Instead, Kevin handed me a massive surprise of his own. My phone vibrated, pulling me from my thoughts. Your expedited divorce papers are almost ready. The process will be complete in a week. Then we'll get you and Hugh out of here. I managed to fake a smile. Good, in a week Kevin and I would be nothing to each other. After that, Kevin started juggling his time between Serena and me. Afraid I'd be upset, he sent carload after carload of gifts. The latest jewelry, limited edition handbags. All the things I used to love. Trust me, we'll be back to normal soon. I love you. I'd lost count of how many times he knelt before me, proclaiming his love and his helplessness. It was laughable. He slept with Serena every night, yet he was terrified of upsetting me. 4 days before the divorce was finalized, Serena, whether intentionally or not, suddenly showed up with a huge bouquet of sunflowers. I had a severe allergic reaction to pollen and was rushed to the hospital. Kevin, upon hearing the news, ripped into Serena. If this happens again, you're out. Serena's eyes reddened as she apologized, then covered her face and ran out. That night, Serena disappeared. Kevin and his men searched all night before finally finding her. When they did, she was covered in allergic rashes. She kept her eyes down, not daring to look at me, and stammered nervously. I deserve this punishment. After all, I accidentally caused Miss Audrey's allergy. I was utterly confused, but Kevin gave me a meaningful glance. It wasn't until I overheard him talking to the doctor in private that I realized the truth. Add Audrey's allergen to her 4-drip. Wait a night before treating her. She made Serena suffer, so she'll get a taste of her own medicine. It froze solid. My heart felt like it had been violently smashed to the ground, crushed repeatedly, making it impossible to breathe. The next day, Serena and I were both discharged. Kevin drove us. I didn't want to ride with them, but Kevin practically shoved me into the car. We hadn't driven far when the steering wheel suddenly failed, sending the car careening directly toward the roadside barrier. In that critical moment, Serena suddenly lunged, shielding me. She slammed hard against the car seat. By the time Kevin reacted, he saw Serena, protecting me. His hand instinctively shot out towards Serena. But then his gaze landed on me, and he snapped back to reality. Audrey, thank God you're okay. He didn't spare Serena another glance until she was taken away by the ambulance in the deserted hospital room. Kevin pinned her beneath him, his eyes seething with suppressed fury. Who told you to jump in front? Don't you know you're pregnant? Are you trying to kill yourself? Is that what you want? The next second, Kevin kissed her fiercely. She was pregnant again. My heart felt completely numb. I quietly backed out of the room. Kevin didn't come home that night. It wasn't until the next morning that he stood by my bed, his eyes full of disappointment. I had that car checked. Someone tampered with the steering wheel. I looked up, incredulous. You suspect me? Kevin sighed. I told you, I'm only using Serena. Once I'm done with her, I'll send her away. She's no threat to you. She even risked her life to protect you. Why can't you just accept her? It was summer, but I felt bone-chillingly cold. Kevin actually didn't believe me in the days that followed. He deliberately started freezing me out, but I didn't care anymore. Because in 2 days, I would be leaving with Hugh for good. The day before I left was my 5th wedding anniversary with Kevin. I expected him to continue neglecting me, but instead, he chartered a luxurious yacht to celebrate. Yet the moment we boarded the vessel, his subordinate informed him that Serena had disappeared again. At night, Kevin scoured every inch of New York, but still couldn't find a trace of Serena. He smashed a vase and shards scattered at my feet. Audrey, tell me, where is Serena? I shook my head. I don't know. I really don't know. It wasn't the first time he'd suspected me because of Serena, but my chest still tore open with pain. Someone handed him Serena's phone from before her disappearance. The last call was to me. Kevin rubbed his pounding temples. Audrey, the evidence is right here. Are you still going to deny it? I scoffed. Just because of one phone call? You're convinced I had someone kidnap Serena? I remembered the call Serena made to me before she disappeared. My allergy was self-inflicted. I intentionally messed with the steering wheel too. I knew I wouldn't actually get hurt. I just wanted to put on a show for you, diving in front of you. A man's pity and guilt are the strongest chains. I want Kevin to soften towards me, to compensate me little by little, until I completely replace you. Her ambition on the other end of the line was clear as day. Audrey, I know you and Kevin have a child. Want to make a bet? Let's bet whether you and your son are more important to Kevin, or if I and the baby in my belly are. So Serena's disappearance was a setup, all her doing. But Kevin wouldn't believe a word I said. He looked at me with disappointment. Audrey, Serena is crucial to the plan.
Can you please stop messing around?
Minutes ticked by. The men he'd sent out still had no news. And Kevin completely lost his patience. Serena told me you adopted a child from an orphanage. My spine stiffened. Instantly, Kevin raised a hand, and someone dragged in a canvas sack. Something alive was squirming inside. He picked up a steel pipe nearby, his expression turning vicious. Audrey, last chance.
If you don't tell me
where Serena is, this child won't make it. Hugh. My eyes immediately turned bloodshot. I lunged forward, but someone held me back with an iron grip. Kevin raised the steel pipe high and brought it down with brutal force. No. My pupils contracted, and the world dissolved into a blur of red. As if the blow had landed on me, a whimper escaped the sack. Person inside bounced, then fell heavily, becoming still. A dark stain of blood bloomed from the sack's opening. I completely broke down. My entire world turned
red.
The second blow was raised again. Stop it, that's your child in there. It's your own flesh and blood. Hugh. I was tugged and pulled, screaming hysterically. Tears mixed with blood ran down my face. My eyes filled with shattered despair. Kevin's hand holding the steel pipe paused. Audrey, stop playing games. We agreed not to have children. Why lie to me about something like this? I no longer cared about anything else. I struggled, crawling to his feet, my face drenched in tears as I pleaded. He really is your child. He's your Hugh. Please let him go. Call a doctor. Save him. Kevin bent down, pinching my chin. Be a good girl. Tell me where Serena is, and I'll let him go. I shook my head frantically, tears flying. I don't know. I really don't know. Let the child go. Please let him go. Kevin's eyes instantly turned cold, and the second blow came down fiercely. A muffled groan came from the sack, and absolute silence. Ah, no, I coughed up a mouthful of blood, my body convulsing violently. The third blow, the fourth blow. 10 blows. In all, there was no sound left from the sack. You. Seeing the stillness in the bag, the ground stained crimson, I collapsed to my knees. My body rigid as if electrocuted, yet shaking uncontrollably. I vomited another mouthful of blood, staining the ground before me. Kevin stepped forward, his black leather shoes sinking into the blood and grounded into the sack. Audrey, still not going to talk? He stomped down again with brutal force. The sickening crunch of bones was sickeningly clear hue. I screamed in anguish, crawling forward but being held back with an iron grip. I roared hoarsely, "Kevin, I curse you, you'll never have another child in your life." Kevin's body stiffened abruptly. Just then someone rushed in. "Boss, we found Miss Serena." Kevin's hand, which had been stroking my hair, paused. "Tell me the exact location." He immediately stood up and rushed out without looking back. Not long after Kevin left, two men came in intending to snatch Hugh from my arms. I snapped awake, pulling Hugh closer. "What do you want, boss?" Said to throw him into the sea to feed the sharks. The men were merciless, forcibly ripping Hugh from my arms, disgustedly stuffing him back into the sack, and turning to leave Hugh. I chased after them, my heart tearing apart, but they brutally locked me inside the cabin. When Kevin returned with Serena, he found me slumped on the floor, staring blankly. "Did you order Hugh's body to be thrown into the sea to feed the sharks?" The silence inside the luxury yacht's master cabin was thicker than the
Fog.
rolling off the Hudson. Audrey sat on the plush velvet rug, her knees pulled tight against her chest. The crimson pool on the floorboards had begun to dry around the edges, turning a dark, rusty brown. Her hands were caked in it. Her breath came in short, shallow hitches that rattled deep in her sternum, but her eyes, once bright and fiercely alive, were now hollowed out, dark caverns holding neither tears nor light. The heavy oak door swung open with a muffled groan. Kevin stepped into the room. He had washed the blood off his hands, but a splatter of dark red still spewed across the cuff of his crisp, white linen shirt. Behind him stood Serena, wrapped in Kevin's oversized leather jacket, her face pale, her eyes wide with carefully manufactured terror. Kevin looked down at Audrey. The steel pipe he had wielded on the deck was gone, discarded somewhere in the deep, dark water. His face was a mask of cold, stern authority, the face of a syndicate boss who had just put down an insubordinate revolt. "The crew handled the mess," Kevin said, his voice flat, devoid of any resonance. "You don't need to look at it anymore, Audrey. It's done." Audrey did not raise her head. Her voice was barely a whisper, rasping against a throat torn raw by screaming. "Did you throw him into the sea?" Kevin frowned, a flicker of irritation breaking through his icy composure.
He
Walked over, his heavy leather shoes stepping dangerously close to the dark stain on the carpet. He reached down, grabbing Audrey by her upper arm to pull her up, but her body was entirely limp, like a broken doll. "Stop this drama, Audrey." Kevin snapped, his grip tightening until his knuckles turned white. "It was an orphan, a street kid you brought in from God knows where to play mind games with me. Do you think I'm blind? You knew Serena was missing, you knew the stakes of our counter scheme, and you used a random child to test my resolve." Serena stepped forward, her voice soft, dripping with false empathy.
Miss.
"Audrey, please don't blame Kevin. He was out of his mind with worry for me. If you had just told us where I was being held, none of this would have happened. Kevin only did it to protect our operation." Audrey finally raised her eyes. She didn't look at Kevin. She looked straight at Serena. There was no rage in Audrey's gaze, no hatred, no tears. There was only a vast, terrifying void. Looking into Audrey's eyes was like looking into an open grave. Serena's fake tears froze on her cheeks. She instinctively took a step back, shivering under the absolute coldness of that look. "You won, Serena," Audrey said quietly. Her voice was flat, rhythmic, like the ticking of a clock in an empty house. "You got everything you wanted." "Audrey, that's enough." Kevin cut in, pulling Audrey toward the bed and forcing her to sit down. His hands were trembling slightly, though he tried to hide it by shoving them into his pockets. Something in Audrey's unnatural calm was beginning to claw at the edges of his mind, sowing a seed of cold dread he couldn't quite name. "The yacht is heading back to the harbor," Kevin said, his tone softening just a fraction, reaching for the familiar script of his toxic affection. "Once we Doc, I'll have the doctor look at you. You coughed up blood. You're exhausted. In a few months, when the enemies are completely wiped out and Serena gives birth to the child we need for the syndicate's inheritance leverage, I'll send her to Europe. Then it will just be you and me. We'll rebuild our home." He reached out to touch Audrey's cheek, his fingers brushing against a smear of dried blood on her pale skin. Audrey didn't flinch. She didn't turn away. She simply let his hand touch her, feeling nothing more than one feels a cold draft from a broken window. "There is no home, Kevin," she whispered. "There never was." "Don't speak nonsense," Kevin said sharply, withdrawing his hand. unnerved by her lack of reaction. Get some sleep. We dock in an hour. He turned and walked out, ushering Serena ahead of him. The lock clicked from the outside. Left alone in the dark, Audrey reached into the hidden seam of her thick skirt. Her fingers wrapped around a small, waterproof plastic pouch she had stashed there days ago. Inside was a secondary burner phone, one Kevin's men had missed. When they searched her, she flipped it open. The screen glowed dimly in the shadows. A single message sat in the inbox from an encrypted number: the divorce judgment is signed and sealed by the federal court under the Witness Protection Program. The private helicopter is waiting at the North Pier. Time remaining, 50 minutes. Audrey pressed the phone to her chest. A tiny, broken smile touched her lips. Wait for me, Hugh, she whispered into the dark. Mummy is coming to clean your wounds. The private dock at the northern edge of the city was shrouded in heavy rain by the time the yacht tied its lines to the iron cleats. Kevin stood on the upper deck, smoking a cigar, watching his men secure the
Gangway.
The dock lights sliced through the downpour, casting long, razor-sharp shadows across the slick concrete. Beside him, Serena clutched her coat, looking nervously toward the black sedans parked along the pier. Kevin, why are there so many cars? Serena asked, her voice trembling.
Slightly.
Are those our men? Kevin squinted through the rain. The cars were unmarked, black SUVs, their headlights cut, their engines idling with a low, guttural roar. Before Kevin could answer, a tall man in a tailored charcoal suit stepped out of the lead SUV. He carried a sleek silver briefcase and held a black umbrella over
his head.
Behind him, 6 heavily armed men in tactical gear stepped into the rain, their hands resting on the grips of holstered sidearms. Kevin's eyes narrowed. He recognized the man. Julian Vance, the premier underground lawyer for the coast's most powerful families. A man who answered to no single syndicate boss and operated entirely above the bloody squabbles of the streets. Julian? Kevin called down, his voice cutting through the sound of falling
rain.
What is the meaning of this? You're on my territory. Julian walked slowly up the gangway, his leather soles clicking rhythmically against the wet wood. He stopped 5 paces from Kevin. He didn't look at Serena. He didn't look at the armed guards surrounding Kevin. I am not here on syndicate business, Boss Kevin, Julian said, his tone as crisp and cold as freshly cut glass. I am here as the legal representative of Mrs. Audrey Chun. Kevin let out a harsh, mocking laugh. Audrey? She called you? Julian, you know how this world works. She's my wife. Syndicate wives don't hire lawyers and they certainly don't leave their husbands. Correction, Julian replied smoothly, opening his silver briefcase. She was your wife. Julian pulled out a thick document stamped with heavy red seals and tossed it onto the glass table between them. As of midnight, the federal high court, utilizing emergency jurisdiction under the Special Protection Act, has officially dissolved your marriage. You are no longer legally, civilly, or structurally connected to Audrey Chen. The decree is absolute. Kevin's face darkened, his jaw clenching tightly. A piece of paper means nothing on this dock, Julian. She is in the cabin below.
She stays where I say.
She stays. I expected you to say that, Julian said softly. Which is why I brought a delivery for you. A gift from Mrs. Chun before her departure. Julian pulled a thick, manila envelope from the briefcase and handed it to
Kevin.
What is this? Kevin demanded, making no move to take it. The truth, Julian said. The truth you were too blind, too arrogant, and too cruel to see. Kevin stared at the envelope. Rain dripped from his dark hair onto his forehead. Slowly, almost against his own will, he reached out and snatched the envelope from Julian's hand. He tore it open. Inside was a medical dossier from the St. Jude Children's Hospital in Mexico City, dated 4 years ago. Kevin's eyes skimmed the first page. Patient name: Infant Hugh Chen. Maternal name: Audrey Chen. Paternal DNA match analysis: 99.998% paternal marker match. Kevin Vance. Kevin's breath hitched. The cigar slipped from his fingers, falling into a puddle on the deck with a faint hiss. No, Kevin muttered, his voice suddenly hollow. This is fake.
She
forged this. Keep reading, Julian said coldly. Kevin flipped the page with trembling hands. Attached was a series of high-resolution color photographs. The first showed a tiny, premature baby lying in an incubator, a tiny gold ring tied around his wrist, the very ring Kevin had given Audrey on their first anniversary. The second was a formal birth certificate, bearing the seal of the Mexican Department of Health, naming Kevin as the father. The third was a certified blood panel test conducted 3 days ago at the New York Municipal Hospital. The blood type, AB negative, a rare blood type shared by only 0.5% of the population, shared by Kevin, and shared by the child inside the canvas sack. Kevin's hands began to shake violently. The papers fluttered in the wind, soaked by the pouring rain. He really is your child. He's your Hugh. Please let him go. Call a doctor. Stop playing games. We agreed not to have children. Why lie to me about something like this? Kevin, I curse you. You'll never have another child in your life. Audrey's hysterical screams from hours ago echoed in Kevin's ears, louder than thunder, crashing against his skull like a battering ram. The memory played back in excruciating, agonizing detail, the heavy steel pipe in his hands, the brutal force of his own arms swinging downward, the sickening, wet crunch of small bones fracturing through the canvas, the faint, muffled whimper that died instantly under the second strike, the dark, crimson blood blooming through the fabric, staining his black leather shoes as he stomped down, again and again. Throw him into the sea to feed the sharks. No. Kevin let out a strangled, animalistic gasp. He clutched his head, dropping the file into the mud.
No. No.
No. Kevin? Serena stepped forward, her face pale, reaching out to touch his arm. Kevin, what's wrong? What is that paper? Kevin turned his head toward Serena. His eyes were completely bloodshot, filled with an unhinged, horrifying madness. You? Kevin choked out, grabbing Serena by the throat with a grip so ferocious that her feet left the deck. You told me she adopted a child from an orphanage. You swore to me she was using a stranger's kid to trap me. Kevin. Serena gasped, air completely cut off, her hands clawing frantically at his wrists. I thought. I heard. You lied to me. Kevin roared, a sound of absolute ruin echoing across the empty harbor. He slammed Serena violently against the metal railing of the yacht. Serena shrieked in pain, collapsing onto the deck, clutching her neck and hyperventilating. Kevin didn't look at her again. He turned toward the stairs leading down to the master cabin, sprinting like a madman, his boots sloshing through the water. Audrey! Audrey! He screamed, bursting through the cabin door. The room was empty. The bloodstain on the floor was still there, but the bed was neatly made. On the nightstand lay Audrey's diamond wedding ring, sitting quietly on top of a single sheet of paper. Kevin stumbled across the room, knocking over chairs, and grabbed the paper. Written in Audrey's elegant, precise handwriting were just 2 lines. To the murderer of my son, may every breath you take from this day forward taste like his blood. Get the divers. All of them. Every man in the syndicate. Kevin stood at the edge of the stern, roaring at the top of his lungs into his radio. Rain poured down his face, washing away tears he didn't even realize he was shedding. Within 30 minutes, 15 syndicate boats surrounded the dark waters where the yacht had anchored hours earlier. High-powered spotlights cut through the pitch-black waves, illuminating the churning ocean surface. Dozens of divers in heavy scuba gear plunged into the freezing black water, their flashlights casting ethereal, ghostly beams into the abyss. Kevin stood on the edge of the hull, his coat discarded, his shirt soaked through. He looked like a demon dragged out of hell, his hair wild, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his hands bleeding from where he had punched the wooden deck railing until his knuckles shattered. Boss, his second-in-command, Mark, called out nervously, holding an umbrella over Kevin's head. The current here is too strong. The tide shifted 2 hours ago. The deep water trench is right below us. It drops down 300
feet.
If the sack was thrown here, it's already. Kevin spun around and grabbed Mark by his collar, dragging him to his knees. Find him, Kevin screamed, his voice breaking into a hideous, ragged sob.
Find my son.
If you don't bring him back, I will skin every single one of you alive and throw you into this water. Boss, the divers can't see anything. The mud on the seabed is too thick. Then I'll go myself, Kevin screamed. He turned toward the water and made a move to leap into the freezing ocean. But 4 of his senior lieutenants rushed forward, tackling him onto the deck. Boss, no, you'll drown. You don't have gear. Let me go. Let me go. Kevin thrusted violently, hitting his own men with frantic, desperate fists. My son is down there. Hugh is down there. He's cold. He's afraid of the dark. He collapsed onto his knees on the slick deck, his face pressed against the wet wood, sobbing hysterically. The powerful, terrifying boss of the largest crime syndicate on the East Coast was now nothing more than a broken, frantic wreck, clawing at the deck boards until his nails peeled back and bled. Hugh, Kevin whimpered, his forehead resting against the cold wood. Hugh, Daddy is sorry. Daddy didn't know. Daddy didn't know it was you. Serena stood near the cabin door, wrapped in a blanket, watching Kevin's complete psychological breakdown. A cold panic began to settle deep in her gut. She had known all along. She had found out about the child in Mexico months ago through her own informant network. She knew that if Kevin ever found out Audrey had given him a son, an heir to the syndicate, Audrey's position would be unshakable and Serena would be thrown away like trash once her fake usefulness ended. So she had orchestrated the entire play. She had leaked the information about the adopted orphan through a planted source, subtly whispering in Kevin's ear that Audrey was setting a trap. She had pushed Kevin's paranoia to the absolute limit, knowing his explosive temper and ruthless nature would do the rest. She had expected Kevin to beat Audrey, perhaps torture the child slightly to force Audrey to submit. She had not expected Kevin to murder the boy with his own hands in an unhinged frenzy, nor had she expected Audrey to slip away so cleanly with the help of federal authorities. I need to leave, Serena thought, her heart hammering against her ribs. Kevin has lost his mind. When he calms down and thinks through this, he will kill me. She slowly backed away toward the gangway, intending to take one of the cars back to the city. Where are you going, Serena? A cold, gravelly voice stopped her in her tracks. Serena froze. She slowly turned around. Kevin was standing up.
He was no longer crying.
His face was dead gray, completely devoid of human expression. Rain coursed down his cheeks, mixing with the blood from his bruised knuckles. In his right hand, he was dragging a heavy iron wrench he had picked up from the deck toolbox. Kevin, Serena stammered, taking a step backward, her voice trembling violently. I was just going to get you a dry towel. Kevin walked toward her, step by step. The heavy iron wrench dragged along the deck, making a sharp, screeching noise that grated against the rain. You knew, didn't you? Kevin asked softly. What?
No.
Kevin, I swear I didn't know. I thought she brought an orphan from.
Clang.
Kevin swung the wrench with terrifying speed, shattering Serena's kneecap in a single blow. Serena let out a blood-curdling shriek of agony, collapsing onto the deck, clutching her shattered knee as warm blood gushed through her pants.
Ah! Kevin!
My leg! My leg! She screamed, rolling on the ground in agony. Kevin knelt down beside her, grabbing her by her hair and pulling her face up so she was forced to look directly into his dead, terrifying eyes. You told me she had an allergic reaction to pollen on purpose, Kevin whispered, his breath cold against her face. You told me she tampered with the steering wheel. You told me she hired people to kidnap you. And you told me that the child in the sack was a fake. I was wrong. I was tricked too. Serena sobbed, tears and saliva mixing on her face. Kevin, please. I'm pregnant with your baby. Remember? The doctor said. I'm pregnant. You can't hurt me. You need this child. Kevin stared at her abdomen for a long, silent moment. Then, he let out a low, terrifying laugh, a laugh of pure, irredeemable madness. My child, Kevin whispered.
Mark.
Bring the doctor, who did Serena's prenatal exam. Mark ran forward, shoving a middle-aged man in a medical coat onto the deck. The doctor fell to his knees, trembling violently under Kevin's terrifying gaze. Tell her, Kevin commanded softly. Tell her what you found when you ran her blood work this morning. The doctor shook like a leaf in a storm. Miss Serena's pregnancy. It's a pseudocyesis, a phantom pregnancy caused by hormonal injections she took. And the genetic markers from her previous ultrasound belonged to Victor Rossi, the boss of the rival syndicate. Serena's eyes widened in absolute, paralyzing terror. Her last defense had evaporated into thin air. Kevin slowly leaned down, his mouth right beside Serena's ear. You took my son from me, Kevin whispered, his tone as soft as a lullaby.
You
made me murder my own blood. He stood up, looking at his lieutenants. Lock her in the underground vault at the docks, Kevin ordered, his voice flat. and emotionless. Don't let her die. Give her just enough water to stay conscious. Every day, cut off one of her fingers and throw it into the sea.
When?
She has no fingers left. Start on her toes. Let her feed the fish that my son is swimming with.
No. Kevin. Please. Kevin.
Have mercy.
Kevin.
Serena's hysterical screams echoed across the harbor as 4 heavy syndicate guards dragged her away by her arms, her broken leg trailing behind her, leaving a thick trail of blood on the wet concrete. Kevin turned back toward the black ocean. He felt his knees again at the edge of the stern, staring into the dark, bottomless water. Hugh, he whispered, pressing his hands against his face as fresh, scalding tears broke through his dead eyes. Daddy is coming to find you. Just wait a little longer. 2,000 feet above the Hudson River, a private matte black helicopter sliced through the heavy rainstorm, its rotors humming with a steady, rhythmic beat. Inside the quiet, climate-controlled cabin, Audrey sat by the window. She wore a simple black cashmere coat. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun. Julian sat across from her, a glass of amber scotch in his hand, watching her with a mixture of profound respect and silent pity. The divorce is absolute, Audrey, Julian said softly. The federal court has sealed your identity. As far as the world, the syndicate, and Kevin Vance are concerned, Audrey Chin no longer exists. You are now Clara Mercer, sole heiress to the Mercer Maritime Logistics Group in Zurich. Audrey didn't turn her head. She kept her eyes fixed on the city lights, twinkling far below, a sprawling grid of golden dots drowning in the dark rain. And the syndicate's financial ledgers? Audrey asked quietly. Handed directly to the Federal Organized Crime Task Force 15 minutes ago. Julian replied. Every bank account, every smuggling route, every corrupt official on Kevin's payroll. Within 48 hours, federal warrants will be issued. The Vance syndicate will cease to exist. Audrey slowly lifted her right hand. In her palm lay a tiny, worn wooden toy car, a little red race car with chipped paint. Hugh had carried it everywhere he went. He had held it in his tiny hand. When Audrey dressed him in his softest clothes before Kevin's men grabbed them, she pressed the little wooden car against her lips, closing her eyes. A single, silent tear escaped her eyelashes, trailing slowly down her pale cheek, catching the dim LED lighting of the cabin. I promised him, Audrey whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I promised him I would take him to see the snow in Switzerland.
He wanted to build a
snowman. Julian stayed silent, giving her space to mourn. He knew the agony behind her composure. He had seen many cold-blooded retaliations in the underground world, but he had never seen a vengeance as absolute, as terrifyingly silent as Audrey's. She hadn't pointed a gun at Kevin. She hadn't hired hitmen. She had simply let Kevin's own monstrous nature destroy everything he loved, leaving him trapped in a hell built entirely by his own hands. Audrey, Julian spoke softly after a long pause. What about Kevin?
He's
scouring the coast right now. He's gone completely insane. My men report he's diving into the ocean himself without oxygen gear. He's hospitalized twice. Already tonight for severe hypothermia. Audrey opened her eyes. The tear was gone, replaced once again by that vast, impenetrable void. Let him dive, she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. Let him search every inch of that dark water for the rest of his life. Death is too merciful for a man like Kevin. I want him to live a long, healthy life, haunted every single second by the sound of that steel pipe. She turned away from the window, leaning back into the soft leather seat, and closed her eyes. Tell the pilot to increase speed, she said softly. I don't want to smell the sea anymore. 3 days later, the Vance Syndicate headquarters in downtown Manhattan was usually a fortress of absolute power. Today, it was an abandoned tomb. The FBI had raided 3 major logistics hubs at dawn. Over 50 senior lieutenants had been arrested. The syndicate's bank accounts across Cayman and Switzerland were frozen instantly. The rival syndicate, led by Victor Rossi, seeing Kevin's vulnerability, launched a massive territory grab, firebombing 3 of Kevin's primary clubs in Brooklyn. Yet, Kevin Vance didn't care about any of it. He sat in the center of his massive, darkened office on the top floor of the skyscraper. The luxurious room was in complete ruin.
crystal vases were smashed to dust.
Fine oil paintings were shredded. The floor was littered with empty whiskey bottles, dried blood, and thousands of photographs. Every single photograph on the floor was of Audrey. Audrey smiling in Mexico. Audrey sitting in the garden. Audrey holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket at a clinic in Guadalajara. Kevin sat on the velvet sofa, his clothes tattered, his hair unkempt, his face covered in dark, rough stubble. His right hand was wrapped in dirty, blood-stained bandages where his fractured knuckles had infected. In his left hand, he held a small, burned silver locket, a locket he had found in Audrey's bedside drawer. Inside was a tiny, grainy ultrasound picture of Hugh at 12 weeks. Boss. Mark stepped into the office, his face pale, holding a tactical radio. Victor Rossi's men are at the front gate. They've breached the lobby.
Our
Remaining security crew has fled. We need to leave through the helipad
right now.
Kevin didn't move. He didn't even lift his eyes from the ultrasound photo. Where is she, Mark? Kevin asked softly, his voice hoarse, sounding like a dying man's last gasp. Where did Julian take her? Boss. It's over. Mark yelled, tears of frustration streaming down his face. The FBI has issued a red notice for you. The rival gangs are outside with heavy weapons. Audrey is gone. She left the country 3 days ago. She's protected by the federal government. You will never find her. Kevin slowly looked up. His eyes were milky, sunken, filled with a terrifying, hollow quietness. She's gone, Kevin whispered, a bitter, broken smile creeping across his lips. She really left me. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the office were blown off their hinges with a deafening explosion. Smoke and dust filled the room. Heavy automatic gunfire echoed through the hallway as Victor Rossi's hitmen poured into the floor, shooting down the remaining guards. Victor Rossi stepped through the smoke, a heavy gold watch on his wrist, a smirking smile on his scarred face, holding an automatic pistol. Well, Victor sneered, stepping over the debris and looking down at
Kevin.
The great Kevin Vance, the king of the East Coast. Look at you now.
A
dog whimpering in a pile of garbage. Mark drew his gun to protect Kevin, but Victor shot him twice in the chest. Without looking, Mark collapsed onto the rug, gasping for air, before going
still.
Kevin didn't even flinch when Mark died next to him. He didn't reach for his
gun.
He just sat there, clutching the tiny ultrasound photo against his heart. Victor walked over, pressing the warm barrel of his pistol against Kevin's forehead. Where's the syndicate's offshore ledger, Kevin? Victor demanded, his tone vicious. Give me the private keys to the Swiss accounts, and I'll give you a quick bullet to the brain. Kevin slowly raised his head, looking directly at Victor. Do you have a son, Victor? Kevin asked softly. Victor frowned, caught off guard by the bizarre question. What the hell are you talking about? A son, Kevin murmured, tears quietly spilling from his sunken eyes. A little boy with big, bright eyes, who trusts you, who looks at you like you are his entire world. You've lost your damn mind, Victor spat, his finger tightening on the trigger. Give me the code. Kevin let out a soft, gentle laugh. He slowly reached into his coat pocket. Victor, thinking Kevin was reaching for a weapon, instantly squeezed the trigger.
Bang. Bang.
2 bullets struck Kevin directly in the chest. Kevin gasped, his body jolting backward against the sofa. Crimson blood bloomed across his crisp white shirt, matching the stain he had made on the yacht floor 3 days ago. Victor leaned over to search Kevin's coat pocket, expecting to find a keycard or a flash drive. Instead, his fingers pulled out a small, child's drawing, drawn in red and blue crayon on a crumpled piece of paper, depicting a crude drawing of a man, a woman, and a little boy holding hands under a yellow sun. On the bottom, written in shaky childish handwriting, were 3 words. I love Daddy. Victor stared at the paper, stunned. Kevin lay back on the velvet sofa, his chest hitching violently as blood filled his lungs. He didn't feel the pain of the bullets. He only felt a strange, profound warmth spreading through his freezing body. Through the broken windows of his skyscraper office, the dark storm clouds over the city finally began to part, allowing a single beam of cold, pale sunlight to pierce through the gray sky. In his fading vision, Kevin saw the quiet garden in Mexico. He saw Audrey sitting under a blossoming jacaranda tree, wearing her white summer dress, holding a tiny little boy in her arms. The boy turned toward him, reaching out his little hands, laughing with a voice as pure as silver bells. Daddy, the little boy called out. Look,
I drew a picture for you.
Kevin reached out his blood-stained hand toward the light, trying desperately to touch the tiny fingers that weren't there. Hugh. Kevin whispered, his final breath rattling in his throat.
Daddy is
Coming home. His hand dropped heavy and lifeless onto the blood-soaked rug. His eyes remained open, staring fixedly at the pale sunlight breaking through the clouds, forever. Trapped in the nightmare of his own making. 1 year later, Zurich, Switzerland. The winter storm had covered the quiet, pine-forested hills in a thick, immaculate blanket of white snow. The air was crisp, clean, smelling faintly of pine needles and fresh mountain frost. A grand, historic stone manor sat on the edge of Lake Zurich, its warm, golden lights casting a cozy glow across the snow-covered courtyard. Audrey stood on the wide stone terrace, holding a warm cup of black tea in her
hands.
She wore a thick cream-colored wool sweater and a dark scarf.
Her skin
Had regained its healthy, radiant glow, though a quiet, permanent mature melancholy sat in the soft corners of her eyes. Beside her, a large, fluffy white Samoyed dog sat quietly in the snow, its tail wagging gently against the ground. Julian stepped out onto the terrace, wearing a heavy overcoat, carrying a thick leather binder. The final liquidation of the Vance estate was completed yesterday, Julian said, softly, stepping up beside her. Every cent of Kevin's remaining assets, over $400 million, has been placed into the Hugh Chin Memorial Foundation for Abused and Orphan Children. The first medical center broke ground in Guadalajara last week. Audrey took a slow sip of her tea, watching the steam rise into the cold winter
air.
And Serena? Audrey asked softly. She spent 6 months in a state prison hospital. Julian replied coldly. Her wounds infected. She lost the ability to walk. Last month, she was transferred to a maximum security psychiatric facility in upstate New York. She spends her days screaming at the walls, claiming she hears the sound of a steel pipe hitting wood. Audrey stayed silent for a long moment. She didn't feel joy. She didn't feel triumph. She simply felt the quiet, peaceful closure of a long, dark night, finally reaching its end. And Kevin's grave? Unmarked, Julian said. Per your instructions, he was buried in an anonymous plot near the coast. No tombstone, no name, just the sound of the ocean waves crashing against the rocks day and night. Audrey looked up at the vast, clear blue winter sky. In the distance, across the snow-covered lawn, a group of local children from the nearby village were playing, their joyous, bright laughter echoing through the quiet pine trees. They were rolling large balls of white snow, building a giant, round snowman with a carrot nose and charcoal eyes. The large Samoyed dog let out a soft, happy bark, running off the terrace into the deep snow to play with the children. Audrey watched them, a soft, genuine smile slowly gracing her lips, a smile that was warm, real, and entirely free of the past. She reached into her coat pocket, taking out the tiny red wooden race car. She walked slowly down the stone steps into the deep, untouched white snow. She stopped beside a tall, ancient pine tree whose branches were laden with heavy, white powder. Audrey knelt down. With her bare hand, she dug a small, neat hole in the cold, clean earth beneath the roots of the tree. She placed the tiny red race car inside. Look, Hugh, Audrey whispered softly, her voice carrying across the quiet, snow-draped forest. We made it to Switzerland. It's snowing just like I promised you. She covered the small hole with soft, white snow, smoothing it over until the ground was completely pristine once more. She stood up, pulling her scarf tighter around her neck, and turned back toward the warm, bright lights of the manor house. She didn't look back. Behind her, the mountain wind blew gently through the pine branches, showering the white ground with a dusting of sparkling snow, leaving the small red car buried deep in the peaceful, silent earth, forever safe, forever free, forever home.